My name's Joanne Richards, and I'm president of the board of Common Ground for Texans. And I'd like to welcome you all to our meeting today. We will be taking our usual summer break, so we will not meet in July and August, but we'll be back in September, hopefully in person, but I'm not holding my breath. If not in person, we certainly will through Zoom. We are hoping, and so today we invited County Clerk Dana DeBeauvoir to talk about election security in the time of the COVID virus. And as usual, Mike Ignatowski will moderate our discussion, and so I'd like to turn it over to him to describe how this Zoom works. One of the advantages for Zoom, for Common Ground for Texans, is that we get to communicate with people all over the United States, and in this case, all over the world, because I think that we have somebody from Mexico on the line. So there it is, for what it's worth. So Mike, let me turn it over to you to introduce Dana, and
Great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. Welcome to everyone from outside of Austin. This is kind of exciting when we do this. I'll be introducing and interviewing Dana today. Everyone else will be on mute during the session. If you want to go to the upper right-hand corner and click on Speaker View, you can get a fuller screen view of the person actually talking. But feel free to go into the gallery view if you want to see everyone's faces or everyone who has their camera on, and get a feeling of the whole crowd there. As usual in these Zoom meetings, we will conduct an interview and talk for a while. Feel free to use the chat window to send in questions. They'll just go right to Ham Richards, who will collect them, and then we'll do a question and answer period later on in the meeting. But feel free to type in questions at any time there. So Dana DeBeauvoir is the Travis County Clerk and handles a lot of the election process. Dana, if you could tell us a little bit about your job and what you actually do to get started, that would be really helpful to everyone.
Okay. The Travis County Clerk is a constitutional office for Texas, and it was created in about 1836 and then modified a couple of times until the 1876 Constitution, where it was formally created. In the early days, it was just the local scribe, the person who kept all the documents and the notes and the records, for public record, and the office was often a kind of a dropping place for a lot of other different kinds of jobs. So, for example, when it's very common for county clerks in Texas to also serve as the clerk of the court for misdemeanor records, civil and probate cases. And then the county clerk also serves as clerk of the court for commissioner's court, responsible for providing an independent record of the votes and actions taken by the commissioner's court. And then the job that's the largest part of the job, and the one that's most commonly known, is what we would call real property records or permanent records. Everything that has to do with buying or selling or leasing real property, buying a house, that's handled through the county clerk, and those records are permanent records. So we have records going back to 1836 in the county clerk's office for property and chattel. And then some county clerks also have the job of doing elections. Not all of them. In some cases, it's not the elected official who's conducting elections for their community. It's an appointed elections administrator. And those have grown more popular over the years. The appointed person serves at the pleasure of a board that includes the commissioner's court, the parties, and the county clerk, among others. And the appointments are at the pleasure of the board. So the advantage that jurisdictions get in having an appointed administrator is that it does allow them to combine two offices into one, and that's the Office of Voter Registration plus the conduct of elections, of actually operating elections. So putting those both together usually has some savings for counties, and we see a lot of mid-sized counties who have switched to that model. So those are all the things that county clerks typically do, and I do all of them, and I don't think it's a surprise to anybody about how much I love elections. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this.
Sure. A little bit of trivia for people. There's this thing called the National Association of County Recorders, Election Officials, and Clerks. And in 2009, they named Dana as the Public Official of the Year. So we have a nationally recognized county clerk here talking to us today. Thanks, Dana. So I think something that's been on everyone's mind is the status of mail-in voting ballots. Can you give us today's status of how that's playing out and what's likely to happen?
Yes, thank you, Mike. I'm glad that we get the chance to talk about what's happened with all of the lawsuits and with by-mail voting, because unfortunately it's been mischaracterized as confusing and problematic, and voters aren't going to be able to get what they need. And all of that is the result of biased reporting, not so much the public reporting, but the AG's office putting out information in violation of their court order to mischaracterize the case and the benefit that it has for voters. So just to skip to the dead end, let's talk about what the Texas Supreme Court ruled, I guess it was week before last, for by-mail voting. So a couple little points about it. First of all, the Supreme Court was a complete win for voters. So there's no confusion at all. And I'm really glad for the opportunity to try to get the word out there that no, this is very clear, it's very safe, it's very workable and accessible for voters who want to take advantage of using ballot by mail, perhaps for the first time. Okay, so the first thing that the court talked about was that just the concept of not having an immunity to COVID serving as a status all by itself to get a ballot by mail. The Supreme Court disagreed among themselves as to whether or not lack of immunity actually was a physical condition. Some said yes, some said no. The Supreme Court unanimously agreed, this is a very powerful statement, there's no question about this, that the voter has the right and the prerogative to ask for a vote by mail if they believe that going inside a polling place will injure their health. And all they have to do is provide a sworn signature on that application that says, I'm applying under disability and I know my health history certainly better than any state office holders or the county clerk, and I know what will endanger my health. So if you are one of those people who qualifies for disability because you have comorbidity, because your health history indicates that you will be placed at risk, then you legally are entitled to ask for a vote by mail, and you should not be intimidated against doing that, because we want to make voting, I want to make voting absolutely as safe as possible. So the Supreme Court was clear. It is the prerogative and the right of a voter who has a disability in their opinion and knowing their medical history to ask for that ballot by mail, and there's nothing wrong or illegal about that.
Great. Is that the final word on it now?
So far, so good. I anticipate that, yes, for a while it will be. We are anticipating that the U.S. Supreme Court may take up some of these issues for the November election. So I wouldn't call it the last word, but it is clearly the direction we're supposed to be operating for the July election, and as far as I know right now, for November. And this is very good news for voters.
Dana, we've had several people ask if you could speak more loudly and closer to the microphone.
Okay, I'm going to do that. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. That sounds good.
Okay.
So great. So there's the July runoff and the November general election. When do people have to apply for mail-in ballots? What's kind of the schedule for that?
Yes, you can apply now. And in fact, I encourage people to apply now. You can go all the way up until July 2nd to request a ballot by mail. So that's your magic deadline. You can't ask for one after that. But right now, up until July 2nd, we're available and open to receive requests for ballot by mail. The work that we're doing, we've had to gather up the election all together and deal with all of the hiring people with social distancing. So we are working over the weekend to turn out the bulk of the applications we have already received. That's over 25,000 ballot by mail requests. And so as soon as we could get all of the materials printed, we have a certification for a final ballot. The idea is to send those ballots out in the mail. We made the 45-day deadline for overseas and military, so those all went out fine. And this weekend, we're preparing the rest of the backlog for our local over 65 and disability requests. So by Monday, you should start seeing ballots arrive in mailboxes, and we're starting from the beginning of who sent it in first. So if you just sent yours in, it's probably going to take us a little while to get through to you. But we think we will have that all completely done within this next week. So Monday through Friday of next week, we hope we'll clear that backlog and everybody will have a ballot in the mail.
Great. So people might be concerned that given the substantial increase in requests for mail-in ballots, they can all be sent out in time. It sounds like you've got that under control.
Well, we think so. Certainly, this is far more ballot by mail applications than we have ever had by a factor of almost 10 times. And we've had to clear out room in the county clerk's office to make space available so that we can socially distance the people who are processing all of those by mail ballot applications. And we're going to have, at the height, 100 to 200 people working on those, just depending on how we fill those open positions. And then we'll have another 50 people that we're going to need to socially distance who will also help with by mail balloting, and that's the ballot board. And their work will come just a couple of days before Election Day when we start the processing work. We think the post office is caught up with some of their surprise with the by mail level. We've geared up for it. We have additional resources that help us prepare the ballots more quickly and print them for us, so we're not going to have to do all of those tasks in-house. And I think that's been a big help in making sure we can stay on schedule. I am always worried that we make sure we give people enough time to vote by mail. It's important that voters not receive it at the last minute and then don't have time to turn around and put it back in the mail. Now that said, let's go ahead and settle this question now. If you're one of those folks where you get a ballot by mail and you procrastinate, or you forget about it, or you misplace it, or any number of reasons why you decide that you don't want to vote by mail, ultimately, you can take that ballot with you to any of the polling places. But I want to make sure that voters are clear about what happens next. You do not drop off your by mail ballot. We're not allowed to accept them. They have to be mailed in order to be accepted. But what will happen is a voter can surrender their by mail ballot and then restart the process all over again. The difference being that once you're inside an in-person vote center or early voting location, you will have to show ID. So in other words, you'll surrender your by mail ballot and then you start the process all over again, right back at the beginning, with showing your ID and then casting your ballot at the polling place.
Okay. Another question that comes up is if people mailed in their ballot and then either change their mind or want to vote on a machine because they're a little concerned that their mail-in ballot might not be counted, can they go in and vote on a machine too?
Right. Well, we were just talking about that. So voters who decided to do something different with their by-mail ballot, they can take it in and then immediately re-vote at the polling place.
But what about if they mailed it in ahead of time?
Okay, so you don't have your by-mail ballot. What happens in that circumstance is the voter will still be given the opportunity to vote a provisional ballot at the polling location. And then if they're concerned that their by-mail ballot hasn't arrived, when the ballot board goes to work on those cases, what they will do is cancel the by-mail the by-mail ballot, and then accept the provisional ballot as a legitimate vote. So you'll be asked to do a provisional, but we do reconcile it later so that only one of the ballots gets through. And typically we err on the side of the in-person vote if there's a question between in-person or by mail.
Can you tell us about how the mail-in voting ballots get processed, how the signatures are checked? Is there a valid concern that a lot of them may be rejected compared to voting on a machine?
No, that's not been the research or the history at all. So people don't have to worry that if they submit a by-mail ballot, somehow it's not going to count. It doesn't happen. We count them all. In fact, for presidential elections, it's common for us to get almost a 100% return. So people who vote by mail by mail, and we want to process those ballots. And you were asking another question about the whole process of by-mail balloting. The way it works is a voter sends in a request, and that request needs to have their signature on it, and they also need to tell us what kind of ballot they're asking for. For example, right now, voters are going to need to tell us, do you want a Republican primary runoff ballot or a Democrat primary runoff ballot? So you have to make the choice between those two. And then there is an option for voters to say, okay, I want to apply once a year. And there's an option to check for that too. We're at the end of the year, so that's not going to serve voters really well. But if they check it right now, it means that they will get this election's set of ballots that apply to their neighborhood, as well as the November election. They'll already be set up for that. When a voter goes to put back all the materials, remember to put the ballot in the secrecy pink envelope, and then you put the pink envelope inside the outer envelope, seal it, and sign your name across the flap. And when that's all done, then it goes to be verified by the ballot board. Yes, they check signatures. We normally don't have an issue with signatures, and I know some places have had that, but it's just not much of an issue here. People sign, we can tell, we just move right on.
Okay, well, that's all great to hear. I think that helps put a lot of people's mind at ease. I
hope so too, Mike, because I'm worried that they've been misled, that somehow this ballot by mail program it's fraudulent and that they're doing something wrong, and all of that is just flat not true.
Yeah, but there'd probably be people worried that it can be challenged.
Exactly.
And a lot of them just get discounted in a close election.
Yes. Well, so let's talk about the AG threatening. I got the letter threatening me personally, calling me lawless. The county judge got the same letter, and what the AG is referring to is third parties are being threatened that if we tell people that they can exercise their right under law to vote by mail, that the AG will come after me or come after the county or even come after the voters. It's just not true. It is just completely wrong because the Supreme Court was very clear about the plain reading of the law. And on top of that, our Attorney General issued an opinion, one of his very first, KP 0009, that says, this is a previous AG opinion, that says the plain language of this section of the law does not require that a person satisfy any further description or evaluation of their specific disability, and that the standard of disability doesn't, outside of the election code, does not apply. So county clerks are not qualified as either doctors or lawyers to question or reject someone's application for a ballot by mail if they qualify on the face of it. So if I have a sworn signature, if the voter meets all of the other criteria for whatever kind of by mail ballot they're asking, then they get to vote, and it is entirely legal, and they should not feel threatened.
Great, great. And I'm glad you don't feel threatened either saying that.
No, I'm going to say it over and over again because I'm telling you what the law says, not participating in the effort to chill voter turnout.
Well, good. But let's talk about in-person voting in the age of COVID-19.
Yes.
And what it's going to look like on July 14th and the runoffs. How many places will be open? How will that work? Will you have enough poll workers there to handle it?
There are a lot of changes so that we can try to make voting for this in-person program as safe as we can possibly make it. I wish everyone could vote by mail, but the law isn't going to go that far yet. Right now, you can swear to a disability, or you can vote over 65, or you can vote out of the county. Those are the qualifications or the categories by which you can cast a by-mail ballot. For early voting, we will have 20 early voting locations, and they do look very different from the ones we've had in the past. The biggest change voters are going to notice is we cannot use grocery stores this time for voting. So we need to make sure that people understand there's going to be plenty of early voting locations, and in fact, some of them are much bigger and allow for much better social distancing than any of our previous locations. And certainly with the situation with the grocery stores, they're doing everything they can just to take care of us. There wasn't a way to put shoppers and voters in a safe situation inside voting stores in the middle of a pandemic. So we're going to protect, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to that option later. The grocery stores are wonderful. We love them, but it needs to be a safer location this time around. So there's new locations for early voting. Also, there are 100 vote centers on Election Day, and of course, any voter can go to any location on Election Day because it is a vote center. So both early voting and vote centers on Election Day are at the convenience of the voter. Pick whichever one is good for you. And we will also have the wait times app on people's phones or laptops to tell them where the closest location is, especially if they've shown up at a grocery store and didn't realize, oh no, not this time, then they can find another location. We're also interested in being able to find locations where there's no lines. Now, I don't think this time we're going to see any lines at all. It's a runoff election, and we've got the special election for Senate District 14. But I don't think it would be a little unusual for this to be a record-breaking turnout. That said, there are some things voters need to be prepared for, especially if they want to vote Election Day, because we're not going to be able to crowd all the voters inside these polling places, even if they are larger. So there will be lines outside, and the lines will be spaced, the individuals 6 feet apart for social distancing. So the line could stretch for a ways, and people could be outside for a while we're waiting to make room for an additional voter inside their vote center or their early voting location. So one of the things we tell people, I am encouraging people to do this time when they go vote, is bring an umbrella, bring some water, because in case you're stuck outside in the sun, you at least have some protection from the sun. If you bring an umbrella, it's going to be much easier and better for you. Once you get inside the polling place, you're going to see a lot of differences for how it's organized. All of our polling places now have one entrance and one exit, so we don't have people crossing over one another, or at least that's our intent. There's PPE in the polling places. All of the election workers will be wearing masks, and we ask all of the voters to wear a mask. Protect yourself and your fellow voters. We're all in this together. If you are one of those folks who shows up without a mask, you will get to vote, but we're going to place you as far away from everybody else as our polling place will allow, to try to make the voters who have worn masks feel safer about that whole inside encounter. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure everybody feels comfortable. You'll see hand sanitizer in the polling places, and for early voting we have plexiglass shields that are in front of the checkout table, or I should say the check-in table. That's the first place people stop, where you show your ID, and you get cleared on the voter registration roll, and then you sign in. That's the highest level of interaction between the voter and the election worker. And the election workers are far more at risk than the voters in this particular program. So we're rotating people. We've got shields in front of them. They're going to be wearing masks. We're doing everything we can, frequent hand washing, to make sure that everybody stays as safe as possible. And if it is not safe for you to go inside a polling place, then you are entitled to a vote by mail based on your sworn signature of disability.
Poll workers tend to be of a vulnerable age group. Do you anticipate any problems getting enough poll workers this year?
Yes. Yes, we think the poll workers shortage it already has hit us, it is hitting us, and so we've changed a lot of the way we do our marketing and recruiting right now to get people to come and work the polls. And I think as a result of that, what we're going to see is more new people, more young people, more folks who don't have the same risks as our, population of typical election judges who do a fantastic job, and we love them dearly, but we just don't want them to be placed in an unfair situation where they're placed more at risk than anybody else. For those who do want to work the election, but are concerned about serving as an early voting worker or as an election day worker, you can also come and work inside the county clerk's office helping us process by mail applications, and you will be socially distanced and masked, and that should be a safer opportunity for those who want to serve but who are worried about it. The one thing that's really difficult for us to handle is when people say they're going to work and then don't show up. That's really difficult to try to cope with, first thing on election morning. Last election for the primary, we had 80 people no-show.
Wow.
For the primary. So that was a lot of scrambling in that first couple of hours trying to get the polls properly staffed and open so voters could vote. To give you an idea of the volume of that, that's 10 times our normal no-show rate.
Wow.
We have sick judges or people that oversleep. It happens. We have folks who, have a problem and don't show up, and they usually end up coming later in the day, or we find a replacement. But it's a completely different picture when your first thing in the morning is you're trying to fill in 80 slots instead of just 7 or 8 folks. So we ask people, make up your mind now if you are going to feel uncomfortable working inside the polling place, and don't commit to it if you're going to be uncomfortable. Tell us in advance, and we'll do everything we can to see that you can still participate in the election, but you'll be as safe as possible.
Great. We've had similar early discussions about election judges, and if we're going to have enough of them, or there's a recruiting problem, and can we change it to working half days or something like that to make it easier?
Yes. Yes to all of that. We're over recruiting, trying to make sure that we have folks committed, that we'll have enough people committed to the polling place, and then a whole group of folks who are going to serve as backup for us in case something goes wrong. So we've upped our game, and we've tried a lot, and for some of the new people that are working, we are trying out for the first time half days. That's sort of a double whammy, because if people work a half a day, then that means we have to going to recruit 2 people for each shift instead of just one. So it has its downsides for making sure that we stay staffed up, but it also invites newer people who are perhaps a little concerned about this big job of running a polling place. It gives them an opportunity to step into it a little more softly and get them prepared and trained to be our poll workers for the future.
Great. I'll just tell everyone listening, I worked as a poll worker when I was in a different state many years ago. And it's actually quite a bit of fun, especially on election day. It's almost a celebration mood there. And I really...
It's a long day.
It's a long day.
It's fun.
You feel part of the process. You feel like you're intimately involved in it. And regardless of what party you're on or the poll worker working next to you, doesn't matter. You're just welcoming voters. And
all the voters get treated as well as we can treat them.
And at least where we were, they provided lots of food and snacks too.
Yeah, county government's a little too lean to do that, unfortunately. but we do our best under the circumstances.
Well, you should get the parties to provide the food. That's what we did in New York.
Yeah. They do provide food to their own campaigns who are working hard, and to the party people who are working hard. So yes, that happens, and they've even been known to bring donuts to polling places.
All right.
So it sounds like your situation was a little better organized, perhaps, than we are.
Well, let me go back a little bit. You talked about a voting app where people can look at all the polling places, see what hours are open. And did you say what the current line is like there?
Yes, it will tell you if you have a long line or a short line. It's called wait times. And you go on to the county clerk's website, go to the elections page, click on wait times, and an app will come up that shows icons that are red, yellow, and green little signal lights. So it shows all the locations where we're offering, especially vote centers on election day, all of the locations, and then whether or not they've had lines formed. And we have people who keep track of that all day long and keep the data entry up to date. One of the things that we realized was with this program is that we really do need an extra person handling it for each of the polling places, because it's difficult for the judge in the midst of all those voters to stand up, go outside, and make a guess about the line. So we now have a different person specified in the polling place to do that job. And it's working out better and better every time. More and more voters are now accustomed to the wait times app and the red, yellow, green icons that tell them where's the best place for them to go.
Is that an app you have to download on your phone, or can you just go to the county clerk's website and see it there?
Go to the website, you can see it there. It works on your laptop or your phone.
Okay, great. That's something that I will definitely use.
Yeah, we want voters to use it. We're making a lot of extra effort to make sure that all the times stay updated very frequently. But like I said, this time it's a short ballot. It is a runoff and a special election. We are not anticipating lines at all. We don't think anybody's going to have to wait, any length of time in line, other than we want to warn voters that because we're limiting the number of people inside the polling place according to the CDC guidelines, you might end up standing outside. And in case you're not in the shade, please bring an umbrella.
Mm-hmm. I remember watching, I think it was the 2018 midterm elections, and the national news was talking about long lines, and one of the areas they featured on the national news was the University of Texas.
Yes.
What are there any changes going to be made to handle that this year?
Yes, they've already been implemented. The university now allows us to have 2 polling places, one on either side of that large campus. So we're at Flan Academic Center as well as Perry Castaneda Library, and that will be in place for November. The other thing that the candidates and the parties have really helped us do is to communicate to voters that the lines, are a function of having enough services, but the lines are also self-created by voters. And so what we need to tell these, especially these young voters, is you don't have to wait in a long line. Get there early. Don't show up at 6:30 at night and expect that you're going to just breeze right in. And, those lines do pile on at the end of election day. And so don't contribute to it. Come at another time where you're going to find a shorter line. It's the same story with the grocery stores, with people who pile on there. And we try to tell them, look, there's probably a place 2 blocks down the road that has 0 line. And you don't have to wait at all. But voters won't listen to that. They will not get out of line once they're in line. They will stand there and create a 3-hour line. And we feel so badly for them because Travis County spends money on locations. We are not one of those places that cuts locations. We have lots and lots of opportunities for voters to vote. It's the problem of how do you get voters to take advantage of all of those resources and not just a few grocery stores, a few hours at the end of election day. So we're trying to educate everybody about that.
Yes. I would expect all-time record turnout this fall.
It's going to be off the chart. And how thrilling is that? I mean, it's really exciting. We are hoping for the largest turnout I have ever seen in my life. And I've been doing elections for 33 years. So we're welcoming it. We're gearing up for it. We hope it's going to be fantastic.
And hopefully warning people.
All of the above, which is why, and if we end up not using the grocery stores in November, which is a decision we haven't made yet, but it's very difficult in the grocery stores, as you know. And of course, they're taking care of us. They're feeding us right now. So we don't want to place any additional burdens on the stores or the shoppers that are in there. And so it's possible that we'll use the same approach to early voting that we use for this July election in November. In fact, the real benefit of the July 14 election, is to teach us lessons about what social distancing and PPE and hand washing and all of those best practices are going to look like in a large turnout election. July is going to teach us a lot of lessons.
Good. So speaking of lessons, were there any lessons learned from what happened in Georgia, in Atlanta?
Oh my gosh, yes. All right, well, the first lesson is Texas has a decentralized form of conducting elections in comparison with Georgia, which has a central statewide system. And there are benefits to having the decentralization of county-run elections because local determination decides how much money is going to be spent, which equipment best serves that community. All of those decisions are local decisions. And none of that happened in Georgia. The folks that were in the counties who were responsible for holding the election were given the equipment. Whether or not they were included in sufficient training is a question. Certainly they didn't participate in the purchase of the equipment or have complete knowledge like we did. When we bought this system, we got training to be able to operate it ourselves so that we had independence from the vendor and independence just in terms of our local decisions about how to conduct the election. So for a lot of reasons, Georgia is not Texas, and more importantly, Georgia is not Travis County, and that's where we're going to see the conduct of the election happen.
That is so great to hear.
Yeah, there are some advantages about statewide purchase of equipment, but oftentimes there's not the emotional investiture at the local level on what the new equipment is. And it always takes time to learn new equipment and get comfortable with it. So we appreciate the fact that in Texas, it's local determination.
Right. So I had a lot of questions that I was going to ask you, but this waterfall of information you're giving us already answered most of them. It's been
right.
One of the questions I think people are either concerned or just want an education on, that they've heard the term ballot harvesting. What is that? Is it illegal? How to prevent or detect it? what can you tell us about ballot harvesting?
Okay. There are two examples I can give you of ballot harvesting that have been in the news a lot lately. One of them is a complaint that, and this comes from the Republican Party, they complain that people who assist, especially over 65 vote by mail voters, that they are interfering with that voter's ability to cast an independent ballot. There is no reason for Travis County to think that anybody in a campaign or anybody's next door neighbor or somebody within their family that helps, especially an elderly person or a person with disabilities, mark their ballot is doing anything other than being helpful in carrying out the voter's intent. Now, likewise, there's also another issue that came about because of the accusation of vote harvesting, and that is the legislature took away mobile voting. So last year we ended up not being able to use the mobile voting program that we had used for a very long time, perhaps as long as 14 years. I was going to go back and see when we initially started it. The criticism of the mobile voting program statewide, not in Travis County, was that many of the school districts, when they were conducting their bond elections, were going to using mobile voting to go to locations that would be particularly beneficial to their outcome. Now that is a problem, and we did not allow it here in Travis County. There were places around the state where there was definitely an effort on the part of school boards to take off their hats for their legitimate job of doing everything they can to serve the community and take care of the children, and they were putting on their conduct of election hats inappropriately. So it is unethical to use public resources to go after a targeted population that's going to benefit your particular outcome. That's why it's important that school boards do not conduct their own election. We want them to take care of our children. That's a legitimate use of their time and resources. What we don't want is for them to use government resources to skew that outcome that is beneficial for them. So it's important to have professional staff conducting elections so that, and a county clerk with some spine, so that when school districts ask for something that is perfectly normal for them to ask for, they want more services for their voters, that someone is able to stand up and say, you're crossing the line to do this. You can do these programs and this program, but you're over selecting if you're trying to just attend, say, the Friday night pizza party that the Parent Teachers Association holds. That's about ballot harvesting. So those are the main issues that we've heard about it. With more people voting by mail at home, we have more people assisting the voter, not less. So the idea that this is somehow an automatically negative thing just doesn't hold up. And I think we also ought to think about who is it that votes by mail. It's overseas and embassy personnel, it's military, Peace Corps, all of those folks, as well as our local people who vote because they're out of town for an extended period or because they have a disability. This over 65, predominantly over 65 in military participation, they don't deserve to be called fraudulent voters. It's simply an untrue accusation.
So helping people vote by mail to the point of taking their sealed ballot and mailing it for them is considered perfectly fine and legal?
It is. You need to sign. If you're an assistant, there's a place for you to sign that you've assisted. That's all anybody asks, just to disclose that you've been an assistant. Now, this time around for this election, voters are going to find that their by-mail ballot is already postmarked. So that idea that you needed a politiquero or a friend or somebody in the campaign to give you a stamp is not going to be a reason this time for voters to go and seek help. It will already be postmarked. They'll be set up for that. So, and the other one more thing I would warn voters about, since we might have a lot more people this time actually vote by mail, is that don't put 2 ballots in one envelope. So couples, husbands and wives, y'all do this sometimes, and what happens is it costs you both ballots. So stick to your individual ballots, sign that flap across the part, and then mail it back in plenty of time to be counted. We'll take care of it from there.
Great. So that's one thing to avoid. Are there any other words of wisdom about what not to do on a mail-in ballot that might invalidate it?
Mail-in ballots require hand-marked ballots. And hand marking is, by its very definition, not correct or not, always sure. Voters make mistakes and they make corrections and they do strike throughs and they'll circle, no, I really meant this. So Texas is an intent of the voter state, and you're allowed as a voter to make your intent clear by circling it or, whatever else, striking it out if you've made a mistake and you want to choose someone else. But what we would say to voters is try not to make any stray marks at all. Be careful when you're making your choices. Make a firm, correct, clearly readable choice, and your ballot is much more likely to be processed without anybody even having to touch it to interpret your preference.
Great. So this has been a great discussion here. Hamilton Richards has been collecting questions that people have submitted. People who have additional questions, please type them into the chat box and they'll go right to Ham. And assuming we have some now, let me turn to Ham to go ahead and ask them for Dana.
Okay, the very first one that came in, even before we started, I'm having trouble following all the court rulings. Are non-senior citizens allowed to vote by mail if they are not sick? I think you've already covered that one, Dana, but why not cover it one more time?
Here's the advice I would give to voters. Don't ask me to be your doctor. I can't tell you, based on your medical history, for which I am not qualified to do any evaluation, what's going to be best for you. I can tell you what the law says. First of all, if you're over 65, please do vote by mail. It's going to be safer for you. If you are considering your health history and you believe you qualify for a disability, you provide a sworn signature, and there is no other method by which you're going to be falsely accused or stopped from exercising your right to vote by mail. The latest ruling from the Texas Supreme Court was not confusing. It was not mixed up. The Supreme Court unanimously said that the decision about a voter's health lies exclusively with the voter. The voter makes the determination about their status for disability. They swear to it and send it in, and that's it. So it is not about me telling people whether I think they're sick enough or not. It is the voter's prerogative to make their own determination, and they are protected by law in doing so.
Next question. When will we get ballots mailed to us for mail-in voting?
My very big question I get asked a lot these days. Well, people sent in their applications to vote by mail really early before we even had a ballot ready. So we had a lot of folks waiting around to vote by mail who didn't realize that we didn't even have a ballot until about 10 days ago. So I can't send you something in the mail if I don't have anything to send you. Now, as we've gotten the ballot certification done, as we've completed our testing for logic and accuracy, and we've started gearing up to have more workers and more personnel process these, we're now at the point where we've already mailed out all of our overseas and military ballots, and now we're working on mailing out the bigger bulk of them, which is for our local over 65 and for people who are out of town. and for disability requests or disability categories. So those, we're working this weekend to get all of the envelopes prepared, and then they go out in the mail on Monday morning, and we'll be working all week on getting batches into the mail. So the first batch goes out Monday based on the work for this weekend, and we will keep mailing them out until we've cleared all 25,000 current requests that have probably been there for some people for some time because of the delay in conducting the election.
Now, are you talking exclusively about the July 14th election?
I am. You have until July 2nd to request a ballot by mail for the July 14th election. And if you wait until the 2nd, just make sure that when you get that ballot back in the mail, that you turn it around really fast, because that's going to be our effort to handle late applications here, as we'll have crews who work double shifts so that we can turn them around immediately and get them back to them.
And of course, for the November elections, technically the parties haven't even chosen their candidates yet, so.
That's exactly right. So but we'll get through.
A while still.
That's one step we need to get through, and then we'll step forward until we're getting ready for the November election. So one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. This probably belongs with the legislature, but still, Dana, your comments on it would be valuable. Why isn't voting by mail offered to everyone? While I appreciate that the disabled qualification is self-assessed and permissive, why even make people claim a disability? Take the case of a single mother who works long hours and lives far from a voting location. Shouldn't she be allowed to vote by mail without falsifying a disability?
Absolutely, and we're certainly not encouraging anybody to falsify anything. But you're right in that my tiny little personal opinion is that voters, especially in the middle of the pandemic, should be able to vote by mail. State law does not have a blanket opening for everybody to vote by mail. It simply does not. There are categories to apply. And the Republican Party has been very clear in Texas about stopping the expansion of the franchise for by-mail voting. So if we have a change in the legislature, then I think we might see some opening up of the requirements for voting by mail, which I think would be a good thing now that we're in this pandemic, and it's not going away anytime soon. To give voters better safety for voting, we want people to participate. We just don't want to put them at risk. Now, the legislature has to do that. A local county clerk can't do anything, and I wouldn't encourage people to break the law either. Nevertheless, I am aware that there's been a misinformation campaign out there convincing people that this is confusing and that we don't have a final answer, when in fact that's not true at all. We have a unanimous Supreme Court decision that says it is the self-assessment and the prerogative of the voter to vote under any of those categories as long as they apply. So over 65, out of town for the entire time of the voting period, or a disability category.
If a voter submitted an application for ballot by mail but did not select the primary, can they still vote in person at a vote center?
Yes. We're probably going to send that request back to you and tell us that you have to say which primary. We're not going to know. The idea is that we'll try to turn it around as quickly as we can back to you, back to the voter, so that they can turn around and vote it. But if you don't get your by-mail ballot, processed from your own perspective timely, you're running late getting it back into the mail, then take the ballot with you to the polling place. You will surrender it. You won't get to hand it over, but you will surrender it, and then you will start the process all over again to vote in the polling place, starting with showing your photo ID. So depending on, how you want to interpret that process, you can either continue to exercise your ballot by mail, by putting it in the mail, and common carrier includes FedEx. If you think the post office might be running a little overwhelmed, you can put it in FedEx and send it to us. And all of those choices are still at the prerogative of the voter.
Isn't there a special election on July 14th to replace Senator Kirk Watson? Is his replacement on the ballot?
Yes, yes, and it will be joined together with the Democratic primary or the Republican primary, whichever ballot you pick. If you live in that district, that replacement election will be on your ballot. It's Bastrop County and the eastern part of Travis County that are in this District 14. So it won't be everybody in Travis County who has the opportunity to that election. And then there's also the possibility of a runoff for that election. We may not be finished on July 14th.
Are counties given the freedom to choose or define their own voting mechanisms? For example, could a county implement an online voting method for their own local elections? In today's era, we can apply for mortgages using the internet, but this country has not moved towards secure online voting. Are counties or cities allowed to experiment or implement their own systems? And what is the existing regulation or overseeing bodies?
Okay. Our current internet does not offer a way to substitute verification when, in other words, to provide verification of who the voter is, while Texas at the same time says we offer a private ballot. You can't double check it if you don't have a way to double check it. So the root piece of information that's there to audit internet voting doesn't exist right now. And as soon as internet voting can figure out how to verify the voter without revealing which ballot belongs to them, then and only then will we be able to safely vote over the internet. Right now, it's not legal by law to vote over the internet. There have been some pilot programs that Texas is looking at that are in other states, but I've not seen the legislature welcome internet voting. And as long as we have this issue about a private ballot, it's going to continue to be an obstacle. Now, England doesn't have a secret ballot. So, I mean, we can do things differently, but I'm not sure that that's really the track we want to take in order to vote over the internet, is you want to give up your privacy. Maybe that's the way we're headed, but I'm not so sure that's what voters want. Now, the other thing about the internet voting is this would be a legislative action. It would require their work, and it would have to require the cooperation of the Secretary of State to set up pilot programs. So if we ever get the chance to do internet voting, we are going to have a very public rollout of it and a very complete conversation about the risks associated with it.
Well, if I could stick my own comment in at this point, as a retired computer scientist, I've been following this issue for quite a long time, and the computer science community is 95% opposed to internet voting using any current or conceivable internet technology. There are just too many insecurities.
You're right, Hamilton. There are, and probably you've heard this said to you a lot. People say, oh, well, if I can bank online, then why can't that's my money, then why can't I vote online? And the answer is, it's this same issue of a private ballot. The bank, with your account code, knows who you are. So it's not a private transaction at all. Everybody knows it's your money in your account, and they agree to do that processing. I would also point out that the banking industry suffers millions, if not billions, in losses every year over those transactions. And that standard is never going to apply to voting. Having millions of ballots lost is never going to be okay for a voting method.
Next question. When I go to the Travis County site, I see that I am registered to vote, but cannot tell if I will receive the mail-in ballot that I requested. How can I tell if I will get a mail-in ballot for the July 15th election?
Right. Well, this is our first opportunity to mail out the ballots for the delayed election. So people have the perception that they've been waiting a long time, only we just got the ballot ready. It hasn't been, we didn't have a ballot back when the election was going to take place in May. We didn't get it until very recently. So we are in the process of working through 25,000 requests right now to respond to our local over 65 disabled and out of the county voters. We're working this weekend. The first batch of those go out in Monday's mail. We'll be sending them out batches, multiple times a day for days and days until we get caught up with the whole thing. So what I would say to people is, I know it seems like a long time to you, but we've only just opened up this voting cycle. So you should be getting a ballot by the mail on a regular time frame.
Next question says that the 26th Amendment says the right to vote shall not be abridged on account of age. Some argue that Texas law, which discriminates on the basis of age, is thus unconstitutional. Are you familiar with this argument?
Very familiar with the argument that 64 years old plus 364 days does not qualify you for a by-mail ballot under the category of over 65. That one day makes all the difference in the world. There are a lot of states who have increased the franchise for by-mail voting. We're seeing resistance to that right now from Texas state officials, from the Republican Party. They're not going to allow that to happen. So for us to expand so that we can include anybody who wants to vote by mail is certainly something that's happening nationwide, but not in Texas.
I might add that the same logic would apply at the other end of the age spectrum. Perhaps it's unconstitutional to forbid 3-year-olds from voting.
Perhaps. And wouldn't you love to hear the lawyers take that on? I'd like to hear that on.
Yeah. Does the mail-in ballot process include some kind of tracking similar to the census process so that we can be sure that our ballot was received and counted?
Yes, there is. Once we get into the process, yes, we do have tracking. And yes, it is something that we can report on and that people can check on, but we're not to that point yet. We've only just begun dealing with this election cycle. So yes, later on, people will be able to call in or check their status by looking at the county clerk's website.
About the actual voting system now being used, have there been any problems in the primary election? Have these been addressed? Are there any concerns about the security of the systems?
Security not. This is the best thing that's on the market. And of course, we can only buy what is certified for the state of Texas. So we've purchased an electronic voting system that's a ballot marking device with a paper trail. The voters have loved it. They've been waiting for that paper trail for so long, and now they finally have it. They're just ecstatic to finally have it. The other question about the things we're doing about the equipment to make it work better this time, this is completely different than when we held the primary. So what they're going to find is some PPE that we're going to give to voters so that when they interface with the equipment, they won't have to actually touch it. There won't be, we're obviously going to clean it often, but you don't have to touch anything once you come inside the polling place, according to the way we've organized it. We will give voters, when they do their sign-in on the e-poll book, we will give voters little finger cots. They're these little covers that go over your finger to help you manage paperwork. It works great on a laptop. So, and then they take off that little finger cot and throw it away. It's just a little piece of plastic. Then we also give them, so once they're checked in, they've signed up to vote and they've got their paper trail, then they're going to go over to the ballot marking device and they will be given a little, looks like a popsicle stick, a little wooden stick, and they can use that to mark the choices on the ballot marking device so that they don't have to touch the equipment either. And then the little craft stick, those little popsicle sticks just get thrown away in the trash as the voters walk out the door. Right after they have put their paper trail, their ballot card, in the ballot box.
Cindy Weatherby asks, this is the first I've heard that Travis County mail ballot return will be postage paid by the county. Do you know of any other counties that are doing that?
A few. Let me think for a second if I can tell you exactly. I've been in talk with lots of people that this was part of what they wanted to try to request for their budgets, and so Commissioner's Court ultimately has the final say in spending that money. But I am sure that the ultimate decision of some of the other county clerks that I talked to and elections administrators was that they were going to try to do the same thing.
Will there be drive? What do I do if I do not receive my ballot?
Go vote. Yeah, don't take your chance. If for some reason something happens to your ballot, then ignore that. Go vote. You will be asked. They will double check it at the polling place, so you can verify all of that once you get there, and then you'll be asked to vote a provisional ballot if it just simply seems lost to you and you've never received it, and that might happen. There's a lot of activity on my mail this time. So if you failed to get your ballot timely, first of all, call us, check with us. We're happy to verify it with you. But if you don't get your ballot in time, go vote.
There's somebody who says, I printed and completed my application and put it in a regular envelope for mailing. I did not know to sign the outer envelope too. How can I check to see if it was received?
Well, we're working that batch right now. So what we're going to do is send it back to you. And you're going to get a second chance to do it right.
How will the voter check in with the e-poll books? Will it be like the past? Will the e-poll books be flipped between the poll worker and the voter?
Yes, we have that same laptop circumstance. And the only difference that people are going to find this time is when they go early vote, there's going to be a plexiglass shield in front of the election worker who is helping you with that sign-in step. And then it does, the little laptop, the little iPad flips over to the voter, and the voters will be signing it with a little plastic cover that goes on the tip of their finger so that they don't have to touch it. And we're also going to ask voters if they'll handle their driver's license for us too. Put it under the little camera at the iPad and so that nobody even has to touch your driver's license. We're trying to do all of those things because we recognize that it's probably not a good idea for everybody to try to show up in person. We have people with comorbidities, and so we want to encourage people that can to vote by mail, but the ones who do come into the polling place, we're going to require masks, we're going to have hand sanitizers, things that keep you from directly touching the equipment, and everything we can think of, including social distancing, to make these polling places as safe as possible.
I think you've probably covered most of the next question, but I'll ask it anyway. Ruben Leslie asks, for in-person voting during the COVID-19 risks, I worry about these things, especially for big turnout in November and possibly at some places in July 14th.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Unmasked adult voters, and especially children in the polling place. The expectation of some that voting curbside will be quick and simple. And for mail-in voting for both July 14th and November, will there be enough staff to process and enough safeguards to keep everyone safe?
In November? Is that what the question was?
Both July and November.
I think we have put together a really solid program for July. But until we see how it works and we can go back and look at what went well and what didn't work well, we want to make sure that we're very clear about what's going to be a completely different picture come November in terms of the turnout. So lessons learned from July will carry forward to November. And the answer is, of course, we always need more resources. We always need more effort. I mean, it's never enough. But I think we have plenty of people working in July to cover, that election. And then we always hire the maximum and offer maximum opportunities to vote for a presidential election. So that will hold true again. I hope it's enough, because wouldn't it be fabulous if we had 100% turnout?
Joanne Richards asks, I believe military can request a mail-in ballot application and ballot on the internet. but they must send in the ballot through snail mail. Will others be able to do so in the future? That is, to request the actual ballot on the internet, not just an application.
Right. That program is working pretty well for the military. I've not heard a lot of research about if it greatly expanded beyond that discrete group, whether it would work well in a general population. And Texas has certainly not taken the lead on investigating any of that, but other places are. And I think what we do is we just stick close to what they're doing. We watch, their processes and pay attention to the research to inform the legislature next time about what changes we might ask for.
Jan Hance asks, if a mark on a mail-in ballot is confusing to understand what the voter intended, will the whole ballot be thrown out or just the race that was confusing?
Well, maybe neither. Texas is what you call an intent of the voter state. And so many people don't know this, but all counting stations are required by state law to review, if you're using an optical scan method of voting, to review the paper ballot, put eyeballs on it, take a quick look at it before you send it over to the scanner to make sure that the scanner will read it properly. So if there's a bunch of crisscrosses and stuff happening with this ballot, it's going to be sent to remake. And what happens in remake is there's at least two people, a whole group makes a decision about what the intent of the voter is. Maybe they scribbled in one choice and then X'd it out and circled another. And most of the time we can tell that meant the voter's intent was, oops, I made a mistake on that one. Please pick this one instead. And when the ballot is remade, it is remade with that intent, and that's according to state law. So in your case, Jan, if somebody made a mark that we just couldn't decipher, then it would be skipped and there would be no vote cast in that particular race. But as a whole, if the ballot is just unclear, then we're required to go through a remake process to make the ballot clear according to what the voter wanted so that it would be read properly through an optical scan. Now, optical scan is only used in Travis County for by mail ballots. We use the paper cards and the electronic copy of the paper to do election day.
Katrina Meredith comments that the online information should indicate whether the registered person is approved for a mailing ballot. Currently, there's no way on the Travis County site to verify that status.
Don't ask me. Do not ask the county clerk to serve as your doctor or your lawyer. I won't give you a good answer. This is voter determined and voter prerogative, and it is not my decision. So we don't want to include any of the state officials or any of the county clerks in making judgment calls about voters' health history.
Rosemary Murphy, who lives in Oregon, says, this discussion makes me happy to live in Oregon with all mail-in ballots, no postage, and automatic registration at the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Yes. Well, and for those of you who've been to Oregon, what a wonderful paradise that place is, especially in the summertime. I've been there many, many times, so it's good for her. And yes, Oregon has a long history of a very successful by-mail voting program. It's Washington and Oregon, and I'm spacing which one was first. It might have been Oregon that was first to do that. I'm just unsure. So, and why it works so very well in Oregon is a bit of a mystery, other than the culture there supports people who follow the rules and who do exactly what the instructions say. Oregon has a wonderful track record of their voters being very correct and compliant in making sure that all of their I's are dotted and their T's are crossed whenever they submit those by-mail ballots, and it's worked very well. Texas has not shown any warmth at all for a universal by-mail ballot. And the other thing is that if you're not willing to go the whole step, like Washington and Oregon and Colorado and Utah, and I think now Nevada, and there are a bunch of states now who are going all by mail. California, that if those ballots, I'm sorry, I'm trying to answer your question, and I'm trying to tie two things together, so I feel a little tongue-tied about this. But for a full picture of by-mail voting, you really do have to think about it in terms of that's it. That you don't offer anything else to voters unless it's in a really small scale, because what happens is that communities end up paying double for an election. They run the traditional polling places, and then they also offer universal by mail, and it's too expensive. So typically states have said, okay, one way or the other. And in most of those states, it's different than in Texas. In most of those states, you're also allowed to take your by-mail ballot and drop it off at a drop box. That's not law in Texas right now. You can't drop your ballot off.
Another audience member asks, I only had a faxed copy of the application for a mail-in ballot, so I was forced to insert the application into a regular envelope. I addressed that envelope as directed and put my return name and address label on it. I did not see any way to sign the outside of that regular envelope. Are you saying that my application will be sent back to me to start over again?
No, there's a difference between the request, the application for a ballot, and the ballot you get back in the mail. So let's clarify that. When you're just asking for us to put you on the list to send you a by-mail ballot, that's just a signature on the card or a copy of the card and send it in. That's all you need. And as long as you're a registered voter, you're going to get a ballot by mail. Now, it's a different story once you've gone to the second part of that process and you're now receiving a ballot by mail in your mailbox. So you got a live ballot. That asks for you to mark it carefully, put it in its own little privacy sleeve, put it in the envelope you are given when you get your ballot, and then sign across the flap. So all of those materials are prepared for the voter. It's different than when you're simply submitting your request. Is that clear?
Laura asks, I think I heard that people with COVID symptoms should request curbside voting, but it seems like this undermines all the precautions she has described, putting poll workers at great risk. How are they dealing with curbside voting requests?
Curbside voting is not the answer to the pandemic. It is much higher risk. Texas law requires us to offer it to voters who have a disability. So it is a program that we do offer. It is not a big program. It's not meant to serve as a substitute. If people try to use it for that purpose, it will get backed up. In other words, lines will form. And so we want to keep it for those who simply have no other way to vote. And tell everybody else, vote by mail or plan to vote early voting or in person. If we rely on curbside, the people who normally use it could get displaced, and we don't want that to happen.
I guess curbside voting is basically for people with mobility problems. Is that right?
Exactly right. That's exactly right. If they can't get inside the polling place because of mobility issues. And sometimes that's temporary, could be an accident. And sometimes it's a long term. So I just want to keep it fresh in people's minds that there are options out there for you to take advantage of if you fall within these categories of being at risk, and we want you to use them. For all the other people, we still think that you can make use of current law to vote by mail. And then for the rest of us, unfortunately, the state of Texas is forcing us to vote in person. That's just the way the July 14th election is being ordered by the state. Joanne
Richards comments, in-person voting allows for a secret ballot. Many groups would like to see in-person voting to continue. I would like to see in-person voting come back after the pandemic has released its grip on us.
We're doing in-person voting right now. That's the way this election will be conducted. The minority of votes will come through by mail. Even if it's 25%, it's still only a portion of the election. Most everyone else will go through early voting or election day vote centers. And we want everybody to help us cooperate. We're going to be wearing masks. We ask voters to wear masks. Come prepared to stand outside, at least for a little while. Bring an umbrella, bring water. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that the inside of the polling place is as safe as possible. It is not the ideal circumstance. But I do, just to comment on your comment, Hamilton, about liking in-person voting. Everybody loves in-person voting. You know, who doesn't like to enjoy the commerce of the polling place? But we shouldn't be asked to agree to in-person voting when we are placing people at risk.
Yeah.
So Texas probably will never give up in-person voting, just my guess.
One of the arguments against against mail-in voting is that it exposes the voter to coercion from an overbearing spouse or threatening boss, and it also allows voters to sell their ballots. Do you know of any research that's been conducted to gauge the extent of that kind of, not exactly fraud, but certainly illicit influence on voting?
Unethical behavior. Yes, there has always been a problem with by-mail voting. By-mail voting is not perfect. It's intended to be a last-ditch effort so that people who live a long way away or who are going to be gone or who have other problems can continue to vote. It was not ever meant as the primary method of voting. So it has its pros and cons. It's actually not all that friendly either. You have to sort of spread it all out at the kitchen table and figure it out. And we would encourage people to take their time in marking their by-mail ballot. So yes, there has always been the issue of undue influence at the kitchen table. And there is nothing that solves that except for offering voters the safe haven of an in-person polling place. So that is always going to be a criticism of it. However, the research shows that it's not a thing that should stop us from using the program. It's a consideration, especially for some folks, but we would still encourage them to get out of the house with their, go to a coffee shop and mark it there. If you think you have an issue at home, or if you do not want, you have the right not to reveal how you vote. So if you don't want the people in your household knowing how you voted, don't do it at the kitchen table. Go someplace else and then mail it in yourself.
I don't have any more questions in the chat. If anybody has a question that they've been holding back, now is the time to send it in.
Well,
Mike, do you have any?
How do y'all feel about the fact that we're probably going to have a pretty good showing, not a huge turnout, but a pretty good showing for the July 14th election. And yet we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're being asked to show up in person to vote. What do y'all think about that?
Well, I think in times of pandemic, the pluses of mail-in ballots overbalance the minuses.
Other thing I would say too is that states that do all by-mail voting took a couple of years to do it. There are things you have to have in place for tracking and security that aren't part of our program right now, because it's a smaller portion of the ballot, and we actually have the physical ballot. The smaller portion of the turnout. So, if we wanted to go by mail, it would take a plan to get us there.
We about ready to wrap this up?
I don't know. Y'all are asking such great questions.
And you're providing such thorough answers.
Thank you.
It's wonderful.
Absolute delight, yes.
Yes.
So we do want to thank all our guests from all over today, all over the country and other countries, and our nationally recognized local county clerk, Dana DeBeauvoir. Thank you very much.
Enjoyed it. Thank you. Y'all have a good day. And remember,
Thank you.
go vote.
We will all go vote. And thank you all, and thank Mike especially, and Ham for doing the questions. And we will take our summer break as we often do, and hopefully we'll come back in September with some new programming. We would like to be able to tell you what the programs will be, but things change, and they change so rapidly that it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen 1 month from now. So we apologize for not being able to tell people what we're going to do right off the bat. But that's the nature of trying to stay on top of things and educating folks about what's happening in their environment. So there it is.